The funniest part about ruining my sister's wedding is that technically, I never ruined anything. I just stopped saving it. And when the entire thing collapsed 48 hours before the ceremony, my mother stood in the middle of a luxury ballroom screaming my name like I'd committed some unforgivable betrayal, while all I could think was, interesting because apparently I was important enough to pay for the wedding, just not important enough to attend it. I'm Alex, 29 years old, software engineer, oldest child. And for almost my entire life, I existed in my family the same way wallpaper exists in a room. Always there. Never noticed. Especially when my younger sister Megan was around. Megan was 2 years younger than me, but you would have thought she was royalty the way my parents treated her. Every accomplishment was extraordinary. Every tantrum was stress. Every selfish decision was somehow someone else's fault. Meanwhile, I became the dependable one, the quiet one, the one expected to absorb disappointment without reacting. When Megan forgot bills, I covered them. When Megan wrecked her car in college, my parents asked if I could help out. When Megan got fired from 2 marketing jobs in 1 year because she didn't like toxic authority, my mother insisted employers were intimidated by creative women. I wish I were exaggerating. The thing is, I actually loved my sister for a long time, or maybe I loved the version of her I kept hoping existed underneath all the entitlement. But eventually you realize some people only love you in proportion to what you provide for them. And the second you stop providing, you become disposable. I learned that lesson 3 months before her wedding. It started during Sunday dinner. My parents still hosted those painfully fake family dinners every week. My dad grilled steaks outside while my mom decorated the dining table like she was hosting a celebrity cooking show. I arrived late after working nearly 12 hours finishing a software migration project for a client. The second I walked inside, Megan squealed dramatically. "Oh my God, there he is. Mr. Impossible to reach." I forced a tired smile. "I was working. Some of us have lives too, Alex." My mother laughed like that was adorable instead of rude. Then Megan suddenly held out her left hand. A huge diamond ring sparkled under the dining room lights. Ryan had proposed. Everyone exploded with excitement. My mother nearly cried instantly. Dad opened champagne. Megan launched into wedding planning before dinner even started. Destination ideas, luxury venues, designer dresses, imported flowers, string quartets, ice sculptures. Every sentence sounded more expensive than the last. Meanwhile, Ryan sat beside her looking like a man slowly realizing he'd accidentally signed up for financial warfare. At one point, Dad finally cleared his throat. "So what's the budget looking like?" Megan waved her hand dismissively. "We only get married once." "That's not a budget, that's a threat." Ryan spoke carefully. "We're still figuring some things out financially." Megan rolled her eyes dramatically. "Ryan worries too much." Then she looked directly at me. "But Alex makes stupid tech money, so maybe he can sponsor the fun parts." Everyone laughed, except me, because deep down I already knew she wasn't joking. A week later, my mother called me while I was driving home from work. "Alex, honey, your sister found the perfect venue." "That's great." "She's devastated because it's slightly outside the budget." I already knew where this conversation was going. "How much?" A pause. 22,000. I almost missed my exit. "For the venue alone, it includes waterfront access," she said quickly like that somehow justified it. I sighed heavily. "Mom, she looks so happy, Alex." There it was, the guilt tone. My mother weaponized disappointment better than anyone I've ever known. "You know your sister's always dreamed of something special." "What exactly are you asking me?" Another pause. Then softly, "Could you help?" And because I'm an idiot, I did. Not because Megan deserved it, but because some stupid part of me still believed that if I loved my family hard enough, eventually they'd love me back the same way. So I paid the deposit. Not partial assistance. Not a small contribution. The entire deposit. And because the venue required a financially secure primary signer with strong credit, the entire contract temporarily went under my name until Ryan secured financing later. Except he never did. Weeks passed. Then months. Every time I asked about transferring responsibility, Megan got irritated. "Why are you acting weird about paperwork?" "Because it's a legal contract, Megan." But somehow I became the difficult one for caring. The deeper we got into wedding planning, the more invisible I became. Megan never thanked me publicly. Not once. In family conversations, my mother spoke about the venue like Megan and Ryan had accomplished it entirely on their own. And stupidly, I kept pretending it didn't bother me, until the dress-fitting incident. That was the moment something inside me finally cracked. Megan invited everyone to her dress fitting, my mother, her bridesmaids, our cousins, Ryan's sisters. Even random friends from college she barely talked to anymore. Not me, obviously, which honestly didn't bother me at first. But afterward they all went to dinner at this expensive Italian restaurant downtown. I only found out because my mother posted photos online. Every single family member was there, including Ryan's extended family, people Megan barely knew, but not me. Then my Aunt Carol commented publicly, "Where's Alex?" And Megan replied, "Keeping him away from wedding photos, lol." Lol, like I was some embarrassing inconvenience. Like humiliating me publicly after I financed her wedding venue was somehow funny. I stared at that comment for nearly an hour. Not because it hurt, because suddenly everything made sense. I wasn't family, I was infrastructure, useful, replaceable, expected, but never valued. The confrontation happened 2 weeks later at my parents' house. I brought it up privately. "Megan, what was that comment online?" She barely looked up from her phone. "What? The wedding photos comment." "Oh my God, Alex. It was a joke. It didn't feel like one," she sighed dramatically. "You're so sensitive lately." My mother immediately jumped in. She didn't mean anything by it. I stared at both of them. "You seriously think that was okay?" Megan crossed her arms. "You always make everything about yourself." That sentence hit harder than it should have, because people only say that after spending years making you invisible. I laughed quietly. "Everything about myself?" "Yes," she snapped. "You hold money over people and then act like some victim." That stunned me. "Hold money over people, you keep bringing up the venue." "I brought it up twice." "Exactly. Because you want credit." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything, waiting for one person to acknowledge how unfair this was. Instead, my mother calmly said, "If helping comes with conditions, maybe you shouldn't have offered." And right there, something inside me went cold, not anger, clarity, because suddenly I understood the rules. My contributions were mandatory, my feelings were optional. After that dinner, I stopped reaching out. No calls, no texts, no checking in, and the craziest part? Nobody noticed for over a week, not my mom, not my dad, not Megan. The only reason my mother finally called was because the wedding venue needed final authorization paperwork. Not because she missed me, not because she cared, because they needed something, again. I answered while sitting on my couch after work. "Alex, honey, the venue coordinator says you still haven't signed the final authorization forms." "I've been busy." "Well, they need them immediately." I leaned my head back against the couch cushions. "Why isn't Ryan handling it?" Silence. Then carefully, "You know finances are tight right now." Meaning they still couldn't afford it, 3 months later. Unbelievable. I rubbed my forehead slowly. "Mom, whose wedding is this? That's not fair." "No, what's unfair is expecting me to bankroll a wedding I'm apparently not even welcome at." Long silence. Then her voice hardened instantly. "You're being dramatic." There it was. The family classic. The moment my feelings became an inconvenience, suddenly I was dramatic. I laughed quietly. "The part where my sister publicly humiliates me after I pay for her wedding isn't dramatic. You're still stuck on that?" That sentence changed my life. Not because it hurt, because it freed me. Because suddenly I realized nothing I ever did would matter enough for these people to respect me. Not sacrifice, not loyalty, not money, nothing. So for the first time in my life, I stopped trying. "Okay," I said calmly. "What does that mean?" My mother asked carefully. "It means don't worry about the authorization forms." Then I hung up, and honestly, for the first time in years, I felt peaceful. The next morning, I drove straight to the venue. It sat on the waterfront overlooking the marina, white stone architecture, massive glass windows, perfectly trimmed gardens, expensive floral arrangements everywhere. Megan's dream venue. The kind of place designed specifically to make people feel wealthier than they actually were. The coordinator, Denise, recognized me immediately. "Alex, perfect timing." I smiled politely. "I need to discuss the contract." Her expression shifted slightly. She led me into a private office overlooking the water and pulled up the reservation paperwork. "Is there an issue?" I took a slow breath. "I'd like to cancel the reservation." Her eyes widened instantly. "The wedding is in 6 weeks." "I know." She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "As primary contract holder, you're legally allowed to do that, but are you certain?" I thought about my sister calling me pathetic. My mother treating me like an ATM, years of being tolerated instead of loved, and suddenly the answer felt easy. "Yes." Denise quietly processed the cancellation. There was a cancellation fee. I paid it without hesitation. Still cheaper than funding the rest of a luxury wedding for people who clearly resented me. Before I left, Denise hesitated carefully. Should I notify the couple? I stood up calmly. No, I said. The contract holder is handling it. Technically true. Then I walked back through the marble lobby feeling lighter than I had in years. Not angry, not guilty, just done. The collapse started slowly. At first there were confused emails from vendors, then frantic texts, then missed calls. Apparently Megan assumed venue coordination delays were normal, until the payment portal disappeared completely. That's when panic hit. I ignored every message, every voicemail, every guilt-filled paragraph text from my mother, until finally Ryan showed up at my apartment. He looked exhausted, like a man who hadn't slept in days. The second I opened the door, he blurted, "Alex, what? The venue? Canceled." His face dropped instantly. "You actually did it. You mean the venue under my legal and financial responsibility?" Jesus Christ, he dragged both hands through his hair. "Megan's losing her mind. That sounds stressful. Why would you do this?" I stared at him for a long moment. "You really want to ask that?" He looked away immediately, because he knew they all knew. Nobody just expected consequences. "She said you weren't welcome because you've been making everyone uncomfortable lately," he admitted quietly. I almost laughed. Imagine paying for someone's luxury wedding while simultaneously being excluded from it because your feelings became inconvenient. "That's unfortunate." "Alex, no," I interrupted. "Don't do that now," he sighed heavily. "She didn't think you'd actually." "Exactly." I stepped back toward the doorway. "She thought I'd keep accepting it." Ryan looked genuinely ashamed. And honestly, that almost made it worse, because shame after betrayal is emotional cleanup. It doesn't undo anything. "The venue's gone," I said calmly. "Figure it out yourselves." Then I closed the door. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. The next 48 hours were complete chaos. My phone became unusable, missed calls, voicemails, texts, emails, even Facebook messages from random relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, once the wedding started collapsing, suddenly everyone remembered I existed. My mother alone left 17 voicemails. 17. The first few were furious. "Alex, call me immediately. What you've done is unbelievable. You are humiliating this family." Then came the guilt phase. "Your sister is devastated. She's been crying nonstop. How could you do this right before the wedding?" Interesting wording. Not, "How could Megan treat you like that?" Not, "We're sorry." Only, "How could you stop helping us?" That told me everything I needed to know. I listened to every voicemail while sitting in silence at my kitchen counter late one night. And honestly, for the first time I heard them clearly, not as family, as users, people who only panicked when access to me disappeared. Eventually my father called. Dad rarely got involved emotionally, which somehow made it worse. I answered after the fourth attempt. "Hello," a long silence. Then finally, "Son," that word almost made me laugh. "You need to fix this." Straight to business, no concern, no apology, no acknowledgement of why any of this happened. Just responsibility, again, no. "You're embarrassing everyone." I leaned back in my chair slowly. "I learned from the best." Silence, then his voice hardened. "This isn't who you are," and maybe that was the saddest part, because he was right. This wasn't the version of me they trained. The quiet version, the obedient version, the version willing to bleed financially and emotionally just to earn scraps of approval. That version was gone. Actually, maybe he was wrong. Maybe this was finally who I really was. Someone who understood that love without respect is just exploitation wearing a family label. Thursday night, Megan finally called me from a different number. I answered accidentally. The second I heard her crying, I nearly hung up. "How could you do this to me?" There it was immediately, not accountability, not apology, outrage, pure outrage that consequences existed. "You told people not to invite me. That was because you were acting insane. I was acting hurt. You ruined my wedding over a joke," I laughed quietly. "A joke? Yes, that's interesting," I said calmly. "Because somehow your jokes always involve humiliating me. You're unbelievable." "No," I said softly. "What's unbelievable is expecting someone to finance a wedding they aren't welcome to attend." "You're my brother." The hypocrisy nearly gave me whiplash. "Only when you need something." She started crying harder, real crying this time, the kind that comes from losing control, not regret. "My life is ruined." "No," I corrected gently. "Your venue is ruined." "Big difference. You're pathetic." There she is. "What? The real Megan?" She went quiet instantly. I stood near my apartment window staring at the city lights below. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. "I spent years thinking if I just helped enough, eventually you'd treat me like family." "Alex, but you already did treat me like family." Silence. Just not the kind of family member you love. Her breathing became shaky. You always hated me. And honestly, that almost hurt more than everything else, because it proved she truly never understood me at all. I loved you more than you deserved, I said softly. Then I hung up. And this time I blocked her number. Friday morning, my cousin Ethan texted me privately. Bro, the wedding is imploding. I stared at the message for a second before replying. How bad? His response came immediately, really bad. Apparently the replacement venue was awful. A cramped airport hotel ballroom with ugly carpeting and fluorescent lighting. Half the guests were canceling. The florist backed out because payment issues started surfacing. The DJ threatened not to show up. Ryan's parents were furious. Megan was screaming at everyone. And my mother. My mother was apparently trying to blame Ryan's family publicly so nobody would discover the real reason the original venue disappeared. Classic. Then Ethan sent another message. Honestly, everyone's finally talking about how badly they treated you. I stared at that text for a long time, not because it made me happy, because it made me sad. People only notice abuse after the person being mistreated stops absorbing it quietly. That's the thing nobody tells you about dysfunctional families. The healthiest person almost always becomes the villain the moment they stop participating in the dysfunction. Suddenly you're selfish, cold, difficult. Not because you changed, because your boundaries became inconvenient. Later that afternoon, Ethan called me. You should hear what Aunt Linda's saying, I laughed quietly. Do I want to? She said Megan pushed this too far. That surprised me. Aunt Linda never criticized anyone openly, especially not my mother. She actually defended me? Yeah. Apparently she said, and I quote, you can't treat someone like garbage while spending their money. I leaned back against my couch cushions. For some reason, that almost broke me emotionally. Not because I needed validation, but because someone finally said it out loud. My entire life I'd been expected to quietly endure everything. And the second I stopped, suddenly everyone could see the imbalance clearly. Funny how that works. Then Ethan lowered his voice slightly. There's something else. What? Megan apparently told people you were jealous of her. I blinked slowly. Jealous? Yeah, she said you canceled everything because you couldn't stand seeing her happy. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Not because it was funny, because it was genuinely insane. Imagine being so emotionally incapable of accountability that you convince yourself someone sabotaged your wedding out of jealousy instead of pain. What did people say? I asked. Ethan snorted. Nobody believes her anymore. And honestly, that was the first moment I realized the family narrative was finally cracking apart. Saturday arrived, the original wedding day, and honestly, I expected to feel worse. I thought maybe guilt would finally hit me, maybe regret, maybe some crushing sadness over what my family had become. Instead, I felt calm. For the first time in years, I woke up without the pressure of saving everyone else from their own choices. I booked myself a luxury balcony suite downtown overlooking the marina. Ironically, it wasn't far from the original venue Megan lost. The room smelled like expensive cedar and fresh linen. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the water. Soft jazz played quietly from hidden speakers while late afternoon sunlight reflected across the harbor. Peaceful, completely peaceful. I ordered steak and bourbon through room service and turned my phone onto silent. No family drama. No screaming, no guilt, just silence. And the scary part? I realized how emotionally exhausted I'd been my entire life without even noticing. Because when chaos becomes normal, peace starts feeling unfamiliar. Around sunset, I stepped out onto the balcony with a glass in my hand. The city lights reflected beautifully against the water below. Somewhere across town, Megan's dream wedding was collapsing in real time, and I wasn't there fixing it. That was the part my family couldn't handle. Not the canceled venue, not the embarrassment, the fact that I finally stopped rescuing them. My phone buzzed once. Ethan, bro, this is insane. I stared at the message before finally replying. What happened now? 3 dots appeared instantly. Then Megan had a meltdown during photos. I sighed quietly. About, someone asked where you were. I actually laughed out loud. Apparently during pre-ceremony photos, one of Ryan's older relatives casually asked why the bride's brother wasn't there. And according to Ethan, Megan completely lost control. She started yelling that you ruined her life, he texted. Then another message arrived. Your mom started crying too. I stared out across the marina silently, not satisfaction, not revenge, just distance. Because for years, every family crisis became my responsibility somehow. And now that I wasn't there absorbing the damage, they were finally being forced to sit inside the consequences of their own behavior. Then Ethan sent the message that stayed with me longest. Honestly, dude, everyone looks miserable. And that hit harder than I expected, because weddings are supposed to feel joyful. But theirs wasn't ruined because of a venue. It was ruined because underneath all the decorations and expensive planning, the family itself was broken. And no amount of flowers or champagne can hide that forever. 3 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. The second I opened the door, I knew something was different. She looked exhausted, smaller somehow, not angry, not dramatic, just tired. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a second before stepping aside silently. She sat at my kitchen table awkwardly, glancing around like she'd never really looked at my apartment before. Which honestly, she probably hadn't. Parents notice the golden child's decorations, not the invisible child's life. I stayed standing near the counter. "What do you want?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally, "I didn't realize," I almost laughed. "That's a dangerous sentence." Her eyes watered slightly. "I didn't realize how hurt you were." There it was, not, "I'm sorry for what we did." Just surprised that I had feelings severe enough to finally break. I leaned against the counter quietly. "Mom, you watched Megan humiliate me for years. She's immature. No, she's enabled." That silence told me I hit the truth directly. "She didn't mean for things to go this far," my mother whispered. I looked at her carefully. Neither did I. That seemed to hit her harder than anything else. She looked down at her hands. "The wedding was awful." I said nothing. "People kept asking questions." Of course they did. "Your father got into an argument with Ryan's parents." Not surprising. "Megan cried most of the night." Again, not surprising. Then finally she looked up at me. "You really weren't going to come?" That question almost broke my heart. Because even after everything, some part of her still assumed I'd show up eventually, still save them, still sacrifice myself for family peace. I shook my head slowly. "No." My mother's face crumpled slightly, and for the first time in my entire life, I think she finally understood that something permanent had broken. A week after the wedding disaster, the family narrative completely fell apart. Because lies only work when everyone stays quiet. And apparently Ryan finally stopped staying quiet. According to Ethan, the real story started spreading during a family barbecue at my Aunt Linda's house. Someone asked Ryan what happened to the original venue, and instead of protecting Megan, he told the truth. All of it. How I paid the deposit, how the contract stayed under my name because they couldn't afford financing, how Megan excluded me from the wedding, how my mother defended her, how nobody apologized, and how they all just assumed I'd continue paying anyway. Apparently the entire backyard went silent. Good, let them sit in it. Let them feel uncomfortable for once. Because I'd spent years swallowing discomfort so everyone else could avoid accountability. Not anymore. Later that night, my dad called me again. This time his voice sounded different, quieter. I didn't know everything. I sat on my couch staring at the dark television screen. "You could have asked." Silence. Then softly, "I think we failed you." And honestly, that hurt more than the insults ever did. Because deep down, that was all I'd wanted my entire life. Not money, not praise, just acknowledgement that the imbalance existed. I closed my eyes tiredly. "You didn't fail me once," I said quietly. "You failed me consistently." He inhaled sharply, but I wasn't trying to be cruel anymore, just honest. "There's a difference between loving someone and relying on them," I continued. "And this family stopped seeing the difference a long time ago." My father didn't argue, because he couldn't. And maybe for the first time in my life, nobody could pretend I was wrong anymore. For about 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, nobody contacted me. And honestly, it was peaceful. No guilt tripping, no fake family emergencies, no emotional manipulation disguised as love. Just silence. I started sleeping better. Started cooking actual meals again instead of surviving on takeout and caffeine. I even realized my apartment felt different without constant anxiety hanging over me. Then Megan posted online. Of course she did. A dramatic black and white wedding photo with a caption about toxic people ruining important life moments. No names, but obvious enough that half the family immediately knew she meant me. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. "Stay strong. Protect your peace. Family jealousy is real." It almost worked too, until Ryan commented, not publicly, but enough people saw the screenshots afterward. "Maybe don't insult people paying for your wedding next time." Absolute silence. Then chaos. Apparently Megan deleted the post within 20 minutes, but screenshots are forever, especially in families addicted to gossip. Ethan called me laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "Dude, Ryan finally snapped." "What happened?" "He moved out." I sat upright immediately. What? Yeah, apparently they've been fighting nonstop since the wedding. That didn't surprise me. Because weddings don't create relationship problems, they expose them. And once someone finally sees the truth about a person, it's hard to unsee it. What was the final argument? I asked. Ethan snorted. She blamed you again. Of course she did. And Ryan basically said none of this would have happened if she treated you like a human being. I leaned back slowly. For some reason, that hurt more than it satisfied me. Because hearing the truth from strangers is one thing. Hearing it from your fiancé after your wedding collapses, that kind of truth changes people permanently. A few days later, my father called again. Your mother wants everyone to have dinner. I laughed immediately. Why? We need to talk. No, you need damage control. Long silence. Then quietly, maybe. At least he was honest. I almost said no. Actually, I should have said no, but some stupid part of me still wanted closure. So Thursday night, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since everything exploded. The second I walked inside, the tension hit me like a wall. Nobody knew how to act around me anymore. Interesting how quickly dynamics shift once the quiet one stops being quiet. Mom looked nervous. Dad looked exhausted. And Megan looked furious, not sad, not remorseful, furious. Like somehow she still believed she was the victim. Dinner was painfully awkward, forks scraping plates, minimal conversation, nobody touching the actual issue. Finally, I set my glass down. So are we going to do this or pretend everything's normal? My mother flinched slightly. Megan crossed her arms immediately. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. I actually stared at her in disbelief. That's your opening statement? You destroyed my wedding. No, I corrected calmly. I stopped funding it. You did it out of spite. I leaned back in my chair. You know what's amazing? Even now, you still can't admit why any of this happened. Because you're selfish? Dad suddenly slammed his hand lightly against the table. Enough! The room went silent instantly. My father looked directly at Megan. No, he said quietly. Enough. I don't think anyone in the family had ever told her that before. Not really. Megan blinked in shock. Dad continued carefully. A month passed after that dinner, and slowly, things changed. Not perfectly, not magically, but noticeably. My mother started calling just to ask how I was doing instead of asking for favors. My father actually invited me to lunch alone once. No family agenda, no hidden request, just lunch. It felt strangely unfamiliar, like meeting parents I should have had years ago, but Megan disappeared completely. No calls. No texts, nothing. Honestly, I preferred it that way. Some relationships don't heal. They just stop hurting once distance exists. Then one rainy Sunday afternoon, there was a knock at my apartment door. Megan. She looked exhausted. No makeup, oversized hoodie, red eyes, like life had finally caught up to her. I just want to talk. Every instinct told me not to open that door emotionally, but I stepped aside anyway. She sat on my couch awkwardly while rain tapped softly against the windows. For almost a full minute, neither of us spoke. Then finally, Ryan left. I nodded once. I know, he said I make people feel used. That sentence hung in the room heavily. Because when multiple people tell you the same painful truth, eventually you have to face it. She looked down at her hands. I didn't realize I was doing that. And for the first time in my entire life, she actually sounded sincere. No defensiveness, no manipulation, just tired honesty. You made me feel invisible, I said quietly. Her eyes watered immediately. I know. No excuses, no arguing, just acceptance. And weirdly, that mattered more than any dramatic apology could have. I kept thinking you'd always forgive me because you always had before, she whispered. That one hit hard because she was right. I had trained my family to believe my boundaries didn't exist, not intentionally, but through years of silence, years of overgiving, years of accepting crumbs just to keep peace. Megan wiped her eyes shakily. I'm sorry, Alex. Simple, quiet, real, and honestly, that was all I'd wanted from the beginning, not revenge, not humiliation, just acknowledgement that I mattered too. I looked at my sister sitting there broken and exhausted and finally human for the first time in years. And something inside me softened slightly. Not fully healed, not magically repaired, but softened. Because forgiveness doesn't always happen in one big emotional moment. Sometimes it starts with finally being seen clearly. People think the hardest part of family betrayal is the moment everything explodes. It's not. The hardest part is what comes after. The silence. The awkwardness. The strange grief of realizing you spent years begging for love from people who genuinely believed your suffering was normal. After Megan left my apartment that night, I sat alone for hours replaying everything in my head. Childhood birthdays where her feelings mattered more. Family vacations where I became the unpaid babysitter. College years where my parents drained my savings helping Megan get back on her feet. Every memory suddenly looked different once I stopped romanticizing it. And honestly, that hurt, because healing isn't just forgiving people. Sometimes healing means mourning the version of family you wished existed. A few days later, my mother called me unexpectedly. "Your sister's starting therapy." That surprised me. "Really?" She says she doesn't like who she became. I stared quietly out my apartment window. Rainwater slid slowly down the glass while cars moved below through the city streets. For a long moment, I didn't know what to feel. Part of me was angry it took losing her marriage for her to finally self-reflect. But another part of me understood something uncomfortable. Some people don't change when they hurt others. They change when the consequences finally hurt them, and maybe that's still growth, even if it comes late. Then my mother said something that completely caught me off guard. "I think I helped create this." I closed my eyes slowly. Because there it was, the truth nobody in my family had ever been brave enough to say out loud. "We always expected you to handle things," she continued softly. "You were easier, more responsible, less emotional." Translation. Megan was difficult, so they overcompensated, and I became emotionally neglected because I didn't demand attention loudly enough. Parents do that more than people realize. The strong child becomes invisible because everyone assumes they'll survive anything, and eventually that child learns their value comes from usefulness instead of love. "I'm sorry," my mother whispered. This time, I believed her. Not because the damage disappeared, but because accountability finally existed. Real accountability, the kind without excuses attached. About 2 weeks later, Ryan asked if we could meet. Honestly, I almost declined. Not because I hated him, because I was tired of conversations that only happened after disasters. But eventually I agreed. We met at a quiet bar downtown on a Tuesday evening. Ryan looked terrible, like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. The second he sat down, he sighed heavily. "I owe you an apology," I shrugged slightly. "You weren't the main problem. That doesn't make me innocent." Fair. The bartender dropped off our drinks before either of us spoke again. Finally, Ryan rubbed both hands together nervously. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "I saw it happening." I looked at him carefully. "With Megan, with your whole family." That surprised me. He stared down at his glass. "At first I thought you were just distant. Then I realized every interaction revolved around what you could do for people." I said nothing. "Your mom called you dependable constantly," he continued quietly. "But honestly, it sounded less like appreciation and more like expectation." That hit harder than I expected, because he was right. Dependable became the family code word for "we can take from him safely." Ryan sighed again. "I should have said something sooner." "Why didn't you?" He laughed bitterly. "Because it was easier to stay on Megan's good side." At least he was honest. Then he looked directly at me. "She really did love you, you know." I almost laughed at that, but Ryan shook his head. "No, seriously, Megan worshipped you when we first started dating." "That's hard to believe." "She talked about how you always rescued her, always protected her, always fixed things." And suddenly something painful clicked into place. Megan didn't know how to love people equally. She knew how to rely on them. There's a difference. A massive one. "She thought you'd never stop," Ryan said quietly. I looked down at my drink. "Yeah," I admitted softly. "So did I." Months passed, slowly, painfully, awkwardly. My family dynamic began shifting, not perfectly, but genuinely. Dad started calling me more often, not to ask for things, just to talk. At first, the conversations were uncomfortable. We didn't really know each other outside of responsibility. But eventually, we found a rhythm. Sports, work, movies, normal father-son conversations we probably should have had years earlier. Mom changed too. She stopped comparing me to Megan constantly, stopped expecting automatic sacrifices. And weirdly, she started thanking me for small things. The first time she did it, I almost didn't know how to react, because appreciation felt unfamiliar coming from her. Megan stayed distant for a while. Therapy apparently forced her to confront a lot of ugly truths about herself. According to Mom, her therapist asked her a brutal question during one session. "When was the last time you showed love without asking for something in return?" Apparently, Megan cried for an hour afterward. Good, not because I wanted her suffering, because self-awareness hurts before it heals. One afternoon, about 6 months after the wedding collapse, the entire family gathered again for Sunday dinner. The same dining room, same table. Same people, but everything felt different now. Less performative, less fake, more careful. At one point, Megan quietly handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" "The venue deposit." I blinked. Inside was a cashier's check. Not the full amount, but enough to matter. "I can't accept this," I said automatically. "Yes, you can." Her voice stayed steady this time. "I spent my whole life taking from you. Let me pay something back." The table went silent. And honestly, that moment meant more to me than the money itself ever could. Because repayment wasn't financial, it was emotional, acknowledgement, responsibility, growth. I looked at my sister for a long moment. And for the first time in years, I didn't see entitlement. I saw effort, real effort. And maybe that doesn't erase the past. But sometimes healing begins the moment people stop defending who they were and start becoming someone better. If there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's that family dysfunction survives through silence. Through the person who keeps absorbing everything quietly. Through the child trained to believe love must be earned through sacrifice. That was me for almost 30 years. The dependable son, the forgiving brother, the emotional shock absorber for everyone else's selfishness. And the moment I stopped participating, everything collapsed. Not because I destroyed the family. Because I stopped carrying it alone. That's the part people misunderstand about boundaries. Boundaries don't destroy healthy relationships. They expose unhealthy ones. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to keep saving people from the consequences of how they treat you. And sometimes, losing access to your kindness is the only lesson people finally understand. The wedding venue wasn't really the thing that got canceled that day. The real cancellation was my role as the family ATM, the family fixer, the family punching bag, and weirdly enough, that cancellation may have saved every relationship in my life, including the one I finally built with myself.